and then moved it up to master's level as my students progressed over the years. And much as we study repertoires of music, you know, I know, say the repertoires of Beatles or the repertoire of punk music or whatever. Here we look at production techniques as repertoires. You know, what kind of production techniques in the box, you know, in the studio are appropriate for the work that we do in terms of our sort of individual studies in areas like you know, digital music production and the like. We'll look at key events and scenes in popular music development, so sort of key moments in musical history that are not just historical, but some of them historic, okay, and the impact that has had on the music industries over the years. We'll look at creative identities, and that's very important. It's very relevant at the moment because two big agendas have really risen up in recent years in terms of diversity. Black Lives Matter and the issues around that is one of those. There's some great reading in that area and what have you that you can look at. But we've actually started to see work, and this is important, it must relate to your music and sound work, in terms of gender identities, right? A lot of work that I've done over the last 20 years is about why there's so few women in music production, for instance, and I'll bring that into the fray, and I've got some PowerPoints and stuff on that. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we've actually seen how the discourses of the LGBTQI, etc., works with regard to creative identities and music production. So that's quite interesting emerging area. Music theory, as I said before, now you don't have to be able to read common practice music notation, right, to do this element. You might be relieved to know. Some of you might, some of you don't. If you do, if you do use notation, you know, as part of your studies to build your argument, then, you know, I can read the stuff. So make sure it's correct when it goes in, so I'll look at that. But actually, in many ways, we look at music theory and musicological theory much more through a genre theory kind of approach. We look at different musicological styles and genres, you know, how to be able to identify different ones, and then, you know, take from that how we can use that in our songwriting and production, what have you. We'll look at the music industry by statistics as well. UK Music as an organisation are very useful, and I've got the most up-to-date figures on those kind of things. If you want to put you know, got the interest in the music industries, that's all coming up. And then at the end of, it's a bit weird because we're starting in January rather than September, but at the end of the midway point, we'll then look at formulating a research question and discovering a focus for the second half of the course. Okay, so to summarize the first half of the course, you're going to write an essay, go into all of that, all the whys and wherefores. You're going to read around the subject. You're going to pick one of the sort of topics from the assignment brief, and you're going to be looking and reading up on what's been said and what's been done over the last century or so in terms of studying popular music culture, and of course those, you know, 4 pillars of that. Then in the second semester, or the second half, what I do, you'll see here it says songwriting, right? Because we have both songwriting and MSc students on the course. So what you're looking at here are key points that if you're doing songwriting that we'll need to address. Right? If I just quickly run down to the bottom of this, you'll see that there's another lot about production, right? So evidently, you know, we don't have 2 sessions a week, but what will happen is that essentially, because both, you know, I've just written this one part of the curriculum for songwriting and the other one just production, you know, I want them to be able to step into both, and that will be reflected in the delivery. Nice open mic there, whoever that is. So we'll look at these questions. What are the times for you to get record? We'll look at ask. I don't know whose microphone that is. Would you mind muting? That's still making noise. All right, I'll try and do it. We'll look at research questions that we'll pose. So in the second half of the module, we're going to be looking at primary research. So in the first half of the module, where we're looking at the history, if you like, looking back at popular music culture and production, what have you, writing a kind of summative essay. The second half, we look at where we are now, going forward. So primary-based research, and that can involve asking questions of artists, producers, and what have you, all that. And we'll look at issues like formula writing, for example, and some case studies based around Stock Aitken and Waterman, that's PWL, Motown, Stax. Something that I'm quite keen on at postgrad level is self-assessment, right? One of my old profs used to say to me, the key bit, I've got postgrad qualification, but you know, when I was working all that through, when I did my PGCE some years ago, the most interesting things is to develop at master's level the ability to self-assess. That's the first thing. And the other one is to be able to integrate the learning materials into what it is that you do. There's kind of two key points. And yeah, you know, 3 or 4 weeks into the second half, we'll go back and look at the work that you presented, and I'll be very clear about how it was assessed, because you know you need to know how to assess. I'll pick that up when I set the essay and show you what I mean by that. But it is important to be able to reflect on your own work and to develop that level of critique, because you know, I don't know if some people want to go into teaching or not, but even if you don't at this level, you know, you need to be able to self-assess. One of the best ways to do that is to assess others. So we'll have a play with that. We'll look at digital audio workstation as a compositional tool. That Hewitt text there, I'm going to have to change. There's plenty of others, and there is some fluidity. They've only got one copy of that, so I'll amend that and I'll put something else in. I've got plenty of good sources there, some specific ones around logic, for instance, and various others. We'll also look out in the second half how to write up a report, because the form of assessment in the first half is an essay, but the form of assessment in the second half is a report. Okay, so you need to know how to write reports. We'll also look at critical listening and analytical listening, and there's an online resource for that. And so there is stuff on Blackboard. As you can see, this is kind of week 7 of the second half. I'm trying to migrate everything at the time to be here on Teams, but I'm still going to keep Blackboard active. And of course, I've got this incredible reading list on there that I'm going to show you today as well. I don't know how easy that is to have up here, but do keep an eye on Blackboard as well, even though we'll do everything on here. I'll try and get everything on here, but you will need to go across there once in a while. We'll look at this one. This is an interesting one. You know, one thing that people do like to study, and when you talk what it is that you want to do, I guess if you wanted to do music therapy, you would have enrolled on the music therapy course that we have, or similar. My friend and neighbour is the person who runs that course, who's the equivalent of Stuart on that course. So I have a lot of hooks and eyes into what they do. But it's also important to note that you know, music therapy is a very particular discipline which actually has its origins in medicine, and everything else that people do with music and what have you in that area is actually known as the therapeutic application. But that's great, and we'll look at some community music case studies and stuff. Okay, I can just hear some chatting going on in the background. I don't suppose you could mute your mic, please. We'll look at genre-specific production techniques by arrangement. You know, I've put up there extreme metal, dubstep, what have you, but you know, whether whether it's junts or trap or whatever, you know, or historical styles and what have you. There's been quite a few people on this course who like to explore retro music production techniques, how to try and create particular production sounds and what have you, from particular eras of time. Got quite keen on the 60s, which was a big era, and there were lots of different methods of production. But yeah, we look at that, or you know, genre going forward, you know, genres and stuff, how to deal with those, and those kind of things that I'll be asking you close to the time to feed in. Say, look, I'd like to know more about how to produce this genre. I'll go, all right, and then we'll get a nice list of what we want, and then I can shape those materials around around that for you. And then a couple of weeks about DIY production, so important. My big fan theory is that even though DIY production has developed rapidly in recent years, there's a history of it, and we'll go back and look at some historical case studies about that over a couple of weeks, and then we'll reflect on the course at the end. So the next one you hear is second semester production. So what happens is that this runs in parallel. Okay, it's not either or, it runs in parallel, and you see that a lot of these things here are the same as were in the list above. So what that actually effectively means, and you'll see it on the learning matrix in a bit, is that we'll split some of the sessions in two halves to deal with both. So you get two kind of takes on the same subject, the production angle and the songwriting angle, and but we'll also have sessions where we'll look at both of those things in sessions. So 1/2 songwriting, 1/2 production, and the relationship between them. So there'll be, you see some similarities there. Something that is different there: scientific methodology, engineering process methodology. Again, I mean, that reflects that some of you, most of you, I think, are on the MSc. So this might not be something that you do if you do the MA strand, but you might find it useful and very enlightening anyway. Because certainly for the report in the second half, I would be expecting you at the very least to be using scientific methodology for case study. Engineering methodology is something that's a little different, but we've historically had people come off the course who are very nifty with electronics and programming and take an engineering kind of approach. So we'll look at that to understand what it is. If you are one of those big people, build a case study around that. Not, I'll be expecting you all to be using scientific methodology in case studies, but I'll teach you how to do it. And again, the marking thing, exemplars and what have you. I will be giving you an example of an essay in this first half as well to look at. It's an exemplar essay. That doesn't mean to say it's absolute first class. It's an exemplar because it does have some errors, because you learn more from work that's flawed. Yeah? I mean, if I put a perfect example, perfect first class piece of work, you know, it's in the distinction stuff, well, you might learn something, but you'll learn more from something that's flawed. It's really the opportunity to teach you how to avoid certain things. It keeps your marks up. And again, then compose and produce in professional audio, professional music production, how to write a report, mentioned above, critical listening versus analytical listening. I love that. Again, the music therapy one crosses over, and you know, stuff, the genre one crosses over, and again, DIY music production. So you'll see there's some differentiation in there. That's to add depth and to add nuance to the pathways that you are respectively on. Right, I'm just going to pause for 2 seconds. Any questions at this stage? And then we can look at the first assessment.
So do you know, for the 2 different sections for the MA and the MSc, should we study each cohort studies both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, you do. It's just that if you have a look at that, you'll find 2/3 of it's common. Yeah. but you'll find a third is some differentiation. So it's good for both cohorts to be studying at the same week. So where you've got two different titles in the same week, we'll do one half of that and one half the other. So everybody gets the same experience, but it gives, you know, perhaps people from songwriting a bit more insight into how we work with scientific methodology, and it will give some of your producers a bit more of an insight into composition and arrangement and that kind of stuff. So there's a nice twofer, really, two for the price of one.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, is that all right? So look, here's the thing. This will be updated. Originally, Stuart wanted to convince me to put this in as a audio exam, and it's a good idea. However, it won't work how I want it to, or I should do pedagogically. So just ignore that for now until that's updated. I've got the actual brief. This is just an earlier version of the handbook, and I'll put it in. So it will be written. What we will do, though, is for the case study, which is the second half, look at that kind of thing, yeah, to be able to put audio recordings in, because it works a lot better there, because that's a lot about primary research. With audio recordings, you can do interviews with people, for instance. You can embed the audio into what you do. You can make some kind of form of introduction or conclusion in an audio kind of sense. So even though I won't be doing the essay as an audio paper, it will be written, the case study has plenty of scope to bring that in. So you'll get that experience, okay? All right, then. So let's have a look at this assessment now. We'll pick it apart more next week once you've had a chance to go away and digest it over the next week, and I'll introduce you to the core readings. You can start getting into that, and you can see how it relates to the essay and what have you. So you'll have a bunch of questions for me next week, and on the back of it all, and that's all well and good. So I suppose the key thing here is that at master's level, I'm not going to give you a title of an essay, right? You know, if you're at college or if you're in the first year of a degree course, you'd probably expect to have some kind of title to work around. That doesn't happen here, because you are essentially, with an essay, developing an argument. And I've got a learning resource to look at that, an online one. I'll see if I can get that up and running with you guys today. There's a link in the study schedule, and something to be able to go away and look at. It's a nice YouTube video and what have you about how to develop an argument. And essentially, the title of an essay is an argument. All right, that's what the title is. So at this level, you've got to find your argument. You've got to pick your argument, if you like, yeah. Because by doing that, you'll eventually generate your title, right? I do have, you'll see there, you know, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 following topics that you can pick from, because you'll need a topic to work around, yeah. That's for sure. So I've given you guidance there, and they are mainly about authenticity. It's an interesting one, authenticity. We'll do some sessions on that. What is authenticity? We can open that up for discussion later. So music production authenticity, that's interesting. You might be getting your brain cells going there. Music production and repertoire. Okay, recurring theme on this module, we look at musical and cultural repertoires and repertoire production techniques. So you can be looking at something in that area. Music production and musical styles, that's where we look at the musicology kind of stuff, if you want to pick a strong musicological argument. We come in from that kind of 20th century approach there to studying musical styles in a historical context. I'll explain that as I go, what that means, but again, you know, if you use notation, you might want to use that to support your arguments and what have you, but it will be sufficient once I've shown you how you can do it to come in around this idea about musical styles and genre. Right? It's a great area to debate and to create an argument around. Yeah, you know, what are genres? You know, what are their principal characteristics? How do they work? You know, is there a taxonomical approach to them? You know, there's a certain number of them, or are they forever developing? That's kind of the essential argument around that kind of thing. And you relate that to musical styles. here's one: music production and the masterpiece album. This is a chestnut, really, and I put it in my undergraduate courses, and I pop it in here because sometimes people really struggle to develop an argument. One of the toughest things I find for people is that you've got to yourself come up with an argument, right? And to get going with that. There's plenty of techniques, and I've got learning materials to help you. But one thing you can do is you can make an argument for a masterpiece album, right? The exemplar essay I give is one of those. And, you know, I won't call it a cop-out. Call it more of a default. If you're struggling, you know, if you haven't got a bee in your bonnet about one of the other topics, then you could make this argument for a masterpiece album. The one the student chooses in the exemplar is The Clash's London Calling, which you could argue for. You know, and that actually gives you a fairly neat argument to jump off on. So, you know, there's a default there. If you struggle to work around the others, you still cover all of the main 4 points as well, and you have to do that. So it's not a cop-out. It's still to the same standard, but it gives you a kind of argument to go for. Anyway, music productions and minorities / diversity. I think that should be updated a bit more to reflect the nomenclature of the times. So, you know, if you've got an argument about representation of individuals or societal groups in music production, there's the one you can jump in on that. And we'll do some historical cultural studies and subcultural studies to understand that in the 20th century context. We'll also then look at recent works in the last handful of years that have looked at how that relates to subcultural identities and, you know, your work and production, for instance, in the 21st century. Right? And, you know, there has been a notable shift from the 20th century to the 21st century, how we work and how music produced. So, which you've probably identified. Although, having said that, you were probably all quite young, maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions, at the turn of the millennium. So it may be that your experience is just of the 21st century music industries. Okay, so then in the argument, you must refer to music production, reproduction practice, society, musicology, and the economics of the music business / music industries. And you must include at least one example of the core reading found under the learning materials, and I'll be introducing you to those in due course. And one item from the course reading list. At the moment, to say that's on Blackboard, you can have a look at that. I'll flash it up today for you to look at. And at least one reference from the library subject guide, music and sound. Okay, that's not a tick box exercise, but it kind of is, because I need to know that you've found core reading and you're using that as a central part of your argument. Also need to know that you're exploring the course reading list and that you find something from there. We rate the reading in terms of 3 categories. We have number 1, top essential or core, as it's called there. So core is essential. You sometimes see the word essential, you sometimes see the word core. That's just how the reading lists appear, but they mean the same thing. Then say you have recommended reading, right? So that would be mostly stuff that's on the course reading list to read around, because there's lots of it. And you'll need to research well to be able to identify them, and that will form part of the assessment, of course, because reading around. And then the library subject guide. So that assures me that you're able to go to find it, for instance, in the music and sound guides, and you can do your own research with a vast array of material. I mean, I'll share this experience with you. I was teaching first years to do essays before Christmas and literature reviews and stuff. And this person had got one of my core books, which is Subculture, The Meaning of Style by Hebditch, which was released in 1980. It's on the reading list here, as it happens, if that's your area. Got really into the whole idea of subculture and was taken by punk. And then was saying, you know, how do I go about studying more about punk? And I put them onto the Find It search item in the library catalogue. and there are 103,000 references to punk. And so, you can imagine, part of your research is being able to filter that down and to be able to read around the subject. If you read around the subject, then what you do is you put them into what's called a bibliography, which is after your references. And I expect you to have bibliographies as well as references. References are those active ones that you summarize or cite in your work. Bibliographies, reading around, right? And I would expect that you would have a reasonable bibliography. So so as you can see, I need to see that you're finding the right sort of essential reading, but it's going to be all research, yeah? And, the quality of your research, your references forms part of the assessment process. So you go off and find that kind of thing. You need to support your argument, and of course you need to refute your argument as well. So ignore the reference to the stereo recording. It's 3,000 words. Here's the learning outcomes. They were up there in the module handbook further up just now. What I have to ensure is that when I assess your work, that for each of those, both the essay and the case study, you have met these learning outcomes, right? If I'm in any doubt when I'm marking the work, I look at these, I know them, I don't memorize, but if I think to myself, has this person really at least passed this module? Have they applied critical reasoning and listening, right? So listening is very important. It's a core component of professional practice, listening. We'll develop listening methodologies in the second half of the course when we do the case studies. Right? I'll introduce you to the reading, because if you're interested in that now, there's no bar on going off and reading stuff that we're going to do in 12 weeks time or whatever. No, not at all. I'd rather you, start reading around stuff you're interested in and what have you. But yeah, we're going to look at critical listening and analytical listening. We're going to look at listening, approaches to listening and what have you, to develop that. Here, though, in the essay, you need to demonstrate advanced understanding of the complex interrelated issues, in a scholarly manner, along with critical evaluation of current paradigms. Okay, all that means is that, a paradigm, that goes back to a philosopher guy called Kuhn, K-U-H-N, it's spelled, where he was fed up historically with binary oppositions, that it's this or that, and sort of realized that in many ways that when we approach a subject, it's not just this and that. That's a great way to get an argument going. But the this and the that are all part of the same thing. They're part of the same paradigm, right? And sometimes you have to be able to think almost in a quantum sense, in developing your thinking, that what is positive could be negative, and what is negative could be positive. Put them both together, wrap up something around. You've got a paradigm, right? Music paradigms, production paradigms, business paradigms, and then understand deep foundational music and sonic structures. I like that one. That works in so many ways, right? So, and to be able to work confidently across discipline boundaries through differential understanding. Right? So I expect in the essay to have reference to all four of those pillars of our learning. You may want to focus more on a musicological argument. You may want to focus more on a production or technologies argument. You may want to focus more on a societal one, and you may want to focus more on music industries argument. But all four of those elements do need to appear and need to be addressed in the essays. Right? And then there's these grading criteria at the end. These appear on the marking feedback sheet. And we'll go through all of that in due course. But each one of these 5 criteria, you'll be marked out of 100, right? On a scale from fail, narrow fail, all the way up through satisfactory, good, very good, excellent, outstanding, so on, yeah? So it's on that kind of scale. As undergraduates, you'd have been used to things like 2-1, 2-2, first, whatever, narrow fail, those kind of things. Pardon me. On a master's, you're looking at passes, merits, and distinctions, right? So as long as it's more than 40%, it's pass. If it's more than 60%, it's a merit, and if it's more than 70%, then it's a distinction, right? But necessarily so we can fine tune your mark. So I do not like this thing where you just get 1 mark. Yeah, don't know if you've ever had that in university, just kind of get 1 mark and told to get on with it. I certainly did in my time at university. That's many years ago as a student. But you know, you kind of get 1 mark and a bit of badly scribbled stuff on a sheet of paper, and they had to go and suck it up really, and that was it. This is, you know, we're much more student focused than that. So, you know, when we look at the adequate review of the core literature here, for instance, that you have, you know, up in the brief, I said one thing from the core reading list, something from the core learning material, something from the reading list, something through the library. You know, have you done that? Have you adequately reviewed it? We'll look at that on a scale of 0 to 100. Right? Number 2, originality of argument and evidence. Original thinking is what we mean here, right? It's hard to be original in any regards. There's an argument in itself, but what we talk about originality is originality of thinking, right? Of your argument and evidence. That'll be marked out of 100. The structure, you know, from here I've put down those kind of 4 main points. Have you in the structure addressed the musicological aspect of what you're doing, the technological, the social, and the economics, right? And does the trajectory of your essay follow a logical path? Yeah, moving from each of these areas one to the other to build and develop your argument, right? That would be marked out of 100. The referencing, the quality of the references and the correct conventions for citation. Another reason I do the essay first is that hopefully you've done reasonable courses and you've learned how to avoid plagiarism over the years, how to summarize correctly, how to paraphrase correctly, how to write short quotes correctly, how to refer to long quotes correctly. I'm not going to spend a really heavy amount of time on this. I'll give you our version of Harvard. We do Harvard, and I will perhaps closer to the submission date just dedicate a half an hour or so of one of these sessions to dusting that kind of thing down, because it's boring just having somebody spend an hour going through that kind of stuff. You should have it by now, but that is one of the things we test here, because, you know, I have found that, you know, people, different institutions, different approaches of referencing, you may have slipped through the net. Maybe your teachers didn't really pick up on your references and stuff at school, college, and university. We need to make sure it's 100%. You know, we've got to go for that. In terms of correct conventions for citation, you only lose marks. You see, I'm not one of these people who, that's an awful philosophy. What I say is that, you know, if you fail to do what it is that you're supposed to do, for instance, correctly cite a summary, correctly cite a long quote, for instance, well, you've lost marks, right? You've lost that because you're not doing it right. I'm not going write it down. So that's really important. So attention to detail. Again, that section there, those two, the quality of the references that you bring to it and how you cite them correctly enough, out of 100%. And then the last one, number 5, knowledge and understanding. Well, evidently you need that at the end to see what it is that you know and what it is that you understand, right? And then that's marked out of 100. And then what we do is we band that. We'll say, I know you've done very good, which is like, if you like, in undergraduate terms, a 2-1 kind of mark in item 1. Item number 2, maybe a weak argument, so it might be satisfactory, so it's a mark around about 40%. Structure might be excellent, you know, might have an excellent structure, and that mark would be in that area 70% plus. Referencing, you might have lots of really good quality references, but you don't cite them correctly, which would be against your mark. So you might be down around about a borderline mark between satisfactory and good, or maybe even satisfactory and narrow fail, you know, if it's really appalling. And there's no need to be, because we can look at that and how to avoid that. And then 5, knowledge and understanding. When you come to sort of wrap up, make conclusions and what have you, you could have score in the 2-1 category. And then what we do is we just do a quick grid and we come up to a mean average mark based upon each of those criteria, which is your final grade. All right. So you don't get that, oh, I've just got 1 mark. How did I get there? You'll see step by step across 5 criteria, you'll be marked against each of the criteria. Then we create a mean mark which is the final one that gets entered. Is that clear? Great. So I know we're coming up to the first hour mark. I won't go here with a major project case study because I don't want to bombard you, and I want to spend the second half of this session focusing on the essay and getting you orientated towards the core reading, so you know where to go, where to find it, so you can start reading, making notes and what have you. So we'll come back to the case study. So I'll whiz past that, right? That'll be in the second half of the course, right, where you're going to submit a report and you've got all these subject areas to look at. Please, in your own time, go and have a read if you're interested in that, and we'll pick it all up. You'll need a central focus, so that's interesting. And that's based on primary research. The other thing is, as I draw down to the end of this part, with these 2-hour sessions, I'll make a presentation for the first half. We'll take a very short comfort break around about the hour mark. If you need to go to the loo or whatever, just to reset. And you'll see from the study matrix, which is going to be my second half of today's presentation, that in the second half, then we go and develop the ideas that are presented in the first half, and they will over the weeks become more interactive. Yeah, we'll get some lively discussion going on in the second half. This is the reading list as it stands. But what I've done in the study guide, and the study guide's an active document. This here just needs updating, just to be clear that it's not an audio essay. I'll make sure that's dusted down in time for next week for consistency. There's plenty here to read around and what have you. But in the study guide, which we'll look at in a few minutes after a short comfort break, we'll use some quick links to the materials that will be updated on a weekly basis. Okay, because I don't want to swamp you with too many things at first. I want to guide you a little bit at first, yeah, and then there'll be a proliferation of all of this stuff, but it reflects what's here on the reading list. Okay, so where's my Teams? Let's click on this. Boom, boom, boom. So I'm going to stop sharing that now. Okay, then. So before we just take a short comfort break, have you got any questions at this midway point? Anything occurs to you at any point, just drop it in the chat. I'm quite happy. I've gotten used to, actually, with this online stuff. I do a kind of very academic module on the first year of 2 courses. A lot of people don't speak up for various reasons. They either want me to maintain my flow, or they're afraid to, or they don't know if they're going to appear daft or something like that. But what is useful is the chat box in the bottom right, and because sometimes you might think of an idea, you think, all right, okay, I don't want to interrupt his flow, so you can always drop any questions as you go into the chat, and then I'll bring those into my delivery as and when they appear. Yeah, and then it keeps a bit of interactivity. But I suspect once we get to know each other and we're off on the path and we're off into researching this essay and writing it, then what we'll do is we'll, certainly in the second half, be a lot more interactive. I think, you know, so when it comes to developing arguments, academic arguments, it's good to chuck things around, yeah? And then we'll do more of a kind of a seminar kind of thing where we'll get people to raise hands and we'll discuss and actually get some audio stuff going, okay? So, look, it's nearly midday. I propose now that we just take a 5, 6, 7, 8 minute break. Tends to work. Any longer than that, people disappear. If you need to take a comfort break or just quickly make yourself a cup of tea or something to settle down for the second half. If you're all right with that, is that okay? I'll put a little bit of music on in the background while we all go off and take that comfort break. Okie dokie. If you're interested, that's Snarky Puppy and a track called Chonks. One of my favorite acts to come along in recent years, you know. I've played a lot of jazz and a lot of jazz fusion in my career. I spent about 10 years just playing loosely anything called jazz, I suppose. Frank Zappa, very famously, when he was asked, you know, what's your take on jazz, and he says, "I think it smells kind of funny," which typical Zappa. I love that kind of stuff. In that field, I play bass because I'm competent. I read, and that helps in that kind of area, you know, because I read the bass class, and you know, because a lot of that kind of work with those kind of things, you know, you get the notes and you've got to get on and play it like that. I like to play by ear. I like to play by ear as well, as they say in the valleys. They play by ear. You know, sorry, mate.
Do you ever jam with Paul Carr?
Well, funnily enough, Paul and I have never jammed. Rob Smith and I have played in bands together over the years. Yeah. I was in the quartet for 7 years or so. Yeah. Playing music not too dissimilar, really, from Snarky Puppy in many ways. Yeah. But some good time kind of ska music as well in there. You know?
Yeah. I toured with Paul with the James Taylor Quartet for about 2 years in London. It was weird when I came back and he was here. I was like, whoa. Good boy.
We've managed to avoid that kind of lecture kind of thing. So we've tried it in my 20 years with the university. We have tried various different approaches to lecture as bands, but I think they're just one of those things that just shouldn't be. You know, unless you're doing you know, jazz at the Guildhall or something, you know, and then maybe, you know, where all the tutors are just incredible shredders or whatever. But you know, you always end up with it like that, with the lowest common denominator rather than the best in class, really.
I really was a jazz arsehole in London. I was a jazz snob.
You could conflate that into a new word, you know, jazzhole. You know.
I was. No, an idiot.
We do cover profane culture on this module under the cultural and subcultural identity. So as long as nobody's abusive towards anybody, we're able to use the words like fuck and things like that, you know, as long as it relates to our subject area. No abuse. But yeah, profane culture, particularly in the area of subcultural identities, that's really important. You'll find a book. That's one of the things if you're interested on this course. Yeah. A reading list called Profane Culture by Willis that was published in the 70s. It's one of the
profane culture. Is that on the reading list?
Yeah, profane culture. It's on the list. It's on the reading list. You'd have to order a physical copy and click and collect. Yeah. At the moment, because it's such an old book. But he was one of the first guys. He kind of, what he did was he went out there, typical ethnographic research, and he hung out with a bunch of hippies in Ladbroke Grove in the late 60s and became part of their counterculture. Then he did studies on skinheads, and I think he moved on to punks. And funnily enough, the book's called Profane Culture because the whole thing is littered with colourful language, or as we would call it in production, industry language.
Yeah.
So let's get back into this then. I've put hopefully you can see the study schedule. Can you all get in that? Cool, right. So I find it a bit disconcerting. I use Collab so I can see what you're seeing on that. I'll see if I can find a way of doing it. So I'm just sort of gawping at my document, but you know, clearly you can see it as we go. So this is a live document, all right? It's intended to become more full as we go on a week-by-week basis. I'll update it every week prior to the class. I've obviously put the first few weeks in so we can get off to a flying start and we don't have to be looking around for stuff. But again, a feature really of my approach to postgraduate and research-led postgraduate learning and teaching is that around the subject themes, you guys direct me where you want to go. Yeah, I'll say, look, I think you need to read this here. That's the spine of the teaching. But if you say, look, I'm going to go over here and look at this, I'll say, great, fantastic. Let's all use that. So these links are active. I've already got them clicked open. So anything blue will take you to either a hyperlink through our library learning stuff. So I'm going to be doing a bit of that with you so you can find stuff. And you'll find that some of these will be links to PDF files that are in the file section in MO4, SO4. So anything that's a file that's linked here, you'll find in the file directory in Teams anyway. You can have a good dig around in that. We'll have a little look at that, I suppose, today. But if you want to jump to something dead quick, you can just do a control click on these and it'll take you to the sources. Now, Stu's put up a MSc critical listening playlist on Spotify there. That again is a work in progress. That's something he's kicked off. I won't be dealing with that today, but I just point out that it's there, and we could even create one for the module as we go. That'd be quite useful. In terms of audio assets, yes, we will be listening to recordings. As we develop through the course, we'll need to, and this is kind of a challenge for online learning, but we'll need to work with higher quality audio, right? Just to be clear, in your assignments here, I'm not going to tell you to jump on the door and write me a song or anything like that. You know, jump on the door and write me an essay, and jump on the computer and write me an essay about the door. But but I will be giving you lots of really practical production techniques under those headings to go off and explore. So here we are, week 1, studying popular music culture wall. I'll come back to them in a bit. We'll once I've scanned through the course, and that's going to be your first bit of reading to take away and read between now and next week. So yes, there'll be weekly tasks, right? There'll be reading that probably you'll need to go off and do. So you know, again, key feature of if I don't mind saying so, well-organized course is that you're going to have some kind of homework, right? Self-study, right? And I'll guide you through that. Then we're going to look at, in week 2, history of communication technologies, how to construct an argument. I might bring that forward into today because I'm kind of like setting the assignment now, in a sense. I mean, mainly I'm walking you through the materials, but we're going to look at how to construct an argument. That might not be a bad one to click on and take home. It's down for next week, but we can easily move that. In fact, why don't I just do that now, because that makes a good idea. Because when you're reading up on wall, you might as well be thinking, all right, am I going to start developing an argument? You know, I've looked at the topics, so I'm going to do that in real time. As I say, it's a real-time document, this, and we'll adapt as we go. There's a PowerPoint you'll find in the whoops-a-days PowerPoint. Sorry about that. Slip of the finger. So there, as we move into next week, we'll look at constructing histories of popular music, again from Wall. We have popular music topics, trends, Brabazon in there. The week after, Strachan. Now here's an interesting one, week 3, key events and scenes in popular music development. If you like, Wall is my core text for the 20th century, studying 20th century popular music culture, right? And the edition that we have here is 2013. I'd expect him to be doing an update now. That's the second version. He wrote the first version in 2003, certainly on the cusp or of the millennium, or within that kind of threshold period. So he was writing it around that point, and it was very much about the 20th century music industries. Clearly, we all know that we moved into a completely new era, or have we, in the 21st century. And it's often used intellectually by people in this subject area as a really useful jump-off point, which means that more recent writings that reflect upon how the music industries have changed in the post-millennial era are on your reading list. The one key one here is Strachan. You'll see that there, week 3, Strachan. I would say that along with Wall, that if you're going to be looking at that kind of differentiation, if you're going to be making an argument about this is what we did in the 20th century, this is what they did in the 20th century music industries, in terms of production practice or cultural identities or musicologically, musical styles wise, this is what's happened, kind of post-millennium stuff. Go read Strachan, right? So they're both core essential texts. I recommend them both, and I'm going to give you a strategy on how you should go about reading those once we have a little look at them in a bit, which I'll bring up. And so you'll see, we've got points in there further down the line: critical listening, analytical listening, how to study record production, listening skills, oral analysis and practice. Stu's popped in a track analysis exercise in there, which would be pretty good, because I think that where we can find the integration with the other modules that you're doing on the course, across the course, then that's a good thing. I said the mantra of my old master's guy was self-assessment and integration, right? If you like, master's learning. We'll look at the doors, the compositional tool, and composing and producing professional audio. Again, we're looking at theoretical frameworks, but hey, I'm tools trained, I'm a tools trainer, I know my way around pretty much any bit of music software you want to chuck my way. I produce music myself, I write and I produce music, so I know how to operate doors. So even though this module is not me and I'm teaching you tools 101 or doing logic training stuff, things like that are elsewhere, I know how these things work. And the important thing is how we can develop theoretical frameworks in this module to actually improve our practice. So, we're not just having a binary opposition of theory and practice, that what you get is an experiential learning process, experiential stuff. So the theory informs the practice informs the theory informs the practice informs the theory, and so on. Okay. We'll look at engineering, design, process, and scientific method further down the line. Music and economics. We'll look at some of all that old kind of post-Marxist stuff from the early 20th century. Excuse me, I've got a tickle in my throat. Just have a glass of water. Oh, that's better. And we'll see how that rinses down through, again, Wall. We keep coming back to Wall, spine of what we're doing. But then we'll also look at some other key interventions. Thornton on disc cultures and club cultures. That's an interesting book that kind of looked at the era of the rave scene, DIY stuff and what have you, which is interesting, part of our thread in DIY production. But we'll also start looking at things like stats. UK Music as an organisation, very useful. They put their reports out in the public domain. I'll be dropping those into your files in a timely manner to be able to look at them and review them and bring them into your study. They just recently did a very good one on diversity, their diversity report. There's a great one they've done on the economics of the music industries, looking at the 6 subsectors. This was just prior to COVID, so that's going to be worth looking at in due course. And I suppose, as I've mentioned, the C word, we had some very good studies about the impact of COVID on the music industries with last year's cohort, because it emerged as they were studying this. And that's the thing, is you move into the second half of this module and you look at primary research, what's there now, what's in front of you, what's to be done. There are many critical questions that can be explored. And that's a very important term, critical question, because if you like, the first half of this course with the essay is about developing an argument, and then the second half is about creating a critical question. Yeah. So those are two important ways of demonstrating your analysis. Yeah. You create an argument in an essay, and you raise a critical question in a case study, and we'll pick that apart as we go. We'll look at what type of music producer you want to be. You at master's level now, you're probably already, well, I expect you're active as a songwriter or as a music producer of some sort. If you're on the cusp of that still, because you're still studying it and thinking, you know, what the bloody hell am I doing this? This might be useful, right? And so some gaps there for self-study, because, you know, that's one of those things. When we've looked at the learning material, you might identify with one or more of the paths into music production. So go off and study that, yeah, you know, as it relates to you. I say all of these things will get populated ahead of every session. So with the learning materials and quick links, repertoires and production. I mentioned that before. That was my innovation. I brought in at undergraduate level about 10 years ago, where when you study musicology, you study a lot of repertoire in terms of artist repertoire, or repertoires based around the popular music industries, for instance, and styles and genres. But I identified that there's lots of different ways to produce things. Let's have repertoires of production, right? And getting down to, you know, appropriate use of compression, for instance, in production. You know, when is it appropriate to use, and what type of settings would you use in vocal production? How would that differentiate using compression with, I don't know, recording and mixing bass, or how would that work with regard to mastering, you know, and multi-band compression, something like that. These different techniques, production techniques, are repertoires to be developed in themselves, and you can develop yours. You know, I'm sure you find workflows and all sorts of stuff that you do when you produce music that work for you. This is an opportunity to reflect, learn some new ones, right, and bring that into your practice. Then we'll look at genre-specific production techniques. Again, I mean, I've just put extreme metal and dubstep in there and remixing as placeholders. You tell me what you want to look at. Yeah, if you want to, I don't know, whatever, you take that pick. Be thinking about that, right? And I'll find it, and I'll find the materials, and I'll give you guidance. Then back to the musical and cultural repertoires at the end of the first half. So we'll round all of that off. Okay, so that's the first half. Semester 2, finding a research focus. You know, as I said, this half of the course is about primary research, so you've got to find a focus. It may be something that you've discovered when you do the essay, that you know, we'll be looking at historically, in a sense, in the essay, and then go, well, you know, where are we at now with regard to this? I want to do a real-time case study and investigate, you know, what's going on in a particular area here, maybe style of music, methods of production, or music industry practice. Yeah, and then you go off and start to formulate that. So then we'll go into methods. Okay, we'll look at research methods and how to develop your own methodology. It's key to masters level 7 stuff, right? Is that, you know, you'll be developing your own respective methodologies, plural. Yeah, differential learning. You know, I'd be expected to see that differentiation, being able to bring different research methods together, and that combination that you use becomes your methodology, right? And you develop that. So we'll look at that, how to write report, research paper guidelines. The other thing we'll stop off about a third of the way towards the end of the second half of this course is that I found historically that when the people do this module, they often get inspired by what it is that they're studying on this module. Now, to be clear, you know, what you require to do on this module, to pass this module, is to do the essay, to do case study, and that's it. Put a line underneath it, say, right, I enjoyed that, or I didn't, and off I toddle, and I'll go and think about my final major project. More often than not, though, because the way in which we set up how to research, right, in the second half of this module, it takes you a long way into getting your final major project set up. And a couple of things usually happen. One, the first kind of example is people finish studying something in this module, say, I'm done with that, I want to go and study something else in the final major project. Well, sometimes people find that there are more critical questions raised at the end of their study, right, than they started with. And it may be the case that that leads you into your further research to do as a final major project. So to be clear, you don't have to take the contents of this module, particularly the case study, and make it your final major project, but we introduce the idea there of the final major project. You might want to do that. If you don't, it gets you thinking about how you're going to set that up and how you're going to differentiate what you do there from what you did on this module, right? And then we'll look at some study kind of stuff there, study skills and what have you. And we've got a couple of blanks at the end there because you were with us for a year, basically. If I need to add anything else in, need to do any extra sessions or something, or I know the situation with COVID changes and impacts upon us in some kind of way, we have to move anything back or whatever, like we did last year. We've got a little bit of flexibility there. So again, there's just some quick hits at the bottom. That's actually a bit of duplication, I think, there. I'll clean that up and take that out. That's just, I think, the draft template they put in. Right, yeah. Okay, so any questions on the study plan? No? No, great. Okay, so what I do now is start introducing you then to the materials to take away and start reading around. Okay. Now in that document, you can click on them, download it from, or perhaps just click on it from the files, I would say, from the pinned up files in the menu, because as I will update it on a weekly basis, and when I really get into the flow of this, I quite often might find myself, I don't know, Friday afternoon thinking, oh, you know, I could put that in, I'll go up. Any changes I'll make within the 7 days, but I don't just do them all the night before. You know, I will populate these things. So yeah, go for it from there, because it will always be the new version. And the first one that we're going to look at, I've mentioned him several times, is Wall. Now I'm going to have to share a different screen here from my browser, and I've got so many bloody, let me start swatting some of these out a second. Otherwise, that might cause confusion. Just bear with a sec. I'm just closing some tabs so it makes it easier for me to pick the tabs on. I was just making sure all these links worked before I saw you guys today, so I didn't send you away and you got any stale links and what have you. But of course, I've left all my browsers open. I'll leave that one open because we'll want to look at that one. So let's swat. Boom, boom, boom. That one. Right. That'll make things a bit easier getting around. Right then. Okay. So, which one am I going to do? That one. There we are. Studying popular music. Full details and actions. That's the one I want. So let me just share that now. We getting that?
Yeah, I can see that.
Fab. Is there a way of receiving notifications when the study schedule is updated? my advice could be, I'll look into it, see if I can set a calendar up or something to do it. But I mean, essentially, I'll make sure that any updates happen at least 24 hours before I deliver. So I'll be using the Monday to tie anything off. Yeah, it's quite often what happens is that with these kind of sessions, certainly when we get interactive, we talk a lot more, and the ideas start flying around. Well, after the session, immediately go and put some stuff in, you know, for next week while I'm inspired, because it's easy to forget, isn't it? So look, I'll just sort of say to you now that any updates will be done by the Monday before we do it, right? And that allows me flexibility if I don't know, got nothing better to do on a Saturday afternoon and Cardiff City have lost, and I just suddenly think, well, you know what, I'll pop that in for those guys, because yeah. All right, so let's have a look at this then. So when you take that study schedule and you look in the first box about wall, what will happen is that you'll be taken to this initially. Let me just change the screen a second, because there's a little sequence there. You can see the actual thing now, but if I boom, boom, boom. That one there. The out hit will take you to that first of all, okay? And what you see on this screen is the Find It tool. So if you ever want to get really quickly to the library catalogue, click on any of the quick links that are in the study schedule, and they'll take you to this kind of landing screen first and foremost, to the book that I'm giving you. But you can also search up in the search engine for absolutely anything you like. You can filter them. We'll have a play around with that as we go. But the key thing here is that when you get this screen, you'll get this, which I'm highlighting now with my little full text available. Okay. When you click on that, it opens into an other tab. Are you getting that one? The VLE books one again? I'm just getting used to this blessed interface. It's just a little bit from Collaborate. Boom, boom, boom. So, well, yes, when you click on the full text available, you get this, right? And this is the full text, and you can read it online. You can download it. Just excuse me a second. Have a little look at that introduction a sec. Excuse me. So, as the intro says, it is a rare thing. An academic study of music that seeks to tie together the strands of the musical text, the industry that produces it, and the audience that gives it meaning, right, as the person says. Up to Wall, the kind of four strands that we're dealing with pretty much developed in their own direction, yeah? There's a long history of popular music history. There's a long history of musicology. There's not such a long history of record production, well, there is now. Go back to the 20th century, and that's interesting to look at. And you know, that's accounted for here. And there's reasonable amount of work on the music industries. I mean, you know, there's kind of, you go back to, let's say, the post-Marxists like Adorno, who first kind of critiqued popular music as a phenomena, right back in the 20s, right, using kind of Marxist critique. Then, of course, you know, the war got in the way, and then after that we had the birth of rock and roll, and that was really kind of when the first independent record labels started to come on, and in many ways is a lot of where we start to kind of study from and what have you. But the music industries were really, I would say, a bit of a mystery for a lot of people until the kind of 80s and 90s when things changed. I'm not going to ease into my lectures there on that, but to give you some kind of idea that this book does encapsulate these. There's our histories of pop music, industries and institutions, production, new tech, musical form, meaning, representation, audiences, and consumption. Right, that's a key part. So I would say that, and because you can download it as well, I would recommend having a download of that one. You know, you can go in. I'll be using it in the teaching. I'll have it online and I'll go through sort of chapter for chapter, blow for blow at the various different points, because we'll be returning to all under the various different headings to have a look at that. So let's just kick you off then. We'll have a look at that. I'll go back and put the book up and we'll have a look. The purpose of us having a look at this before I share it is that as part of the essay, you'll need to review the literature. Remember, it's one of those 5 criteria when we looked at the assignment brief. You'll need to review the literature that you're going to use in your essay, right? And that will involve having a discrete part of the essay at the top called a literature review. Now, I've got lots of really good learning materials for literature reviews. You've probably all done them at some point. From next week, what I'll do is I'll, when we start setting this up, just want you to read around the subject for the following week. If you need extra help with that, we can do it, all right? How to do that kind of thing. Got some good learning materials, and there's like 4 key points in each of those that you can use when you're reviewing literature. And so Wall will be one of your core texts. So I would expect to see Wall cited in there some way along the line. So how do we go about doing that? How do we, you know, we could just dive in and start reading Wall. Well, actually, that's not such a bad idea, right? I will go to my screen now. Where is he? All right. So if I click this read online option, hopefully I'm still logged into Blackboard. Oh, you sods. So what I will do is I will go to the full text available. You usually get, I don't know if you can see this, you can have like full text available. We use different providers. The Sage VLE Books, I tend to use VLE Books. The Permalink, which for some reason or others having a wobble, it's probably because I'm been online so long, but I've not been in Blackboard. Blackboard chucks you out for a while. So yeah, I'm just refreshing my login so that we can see it. So that's just an interesting point, because I've put the link from here in Teams, but to get to, and you've seen it all whirring around in front of you now, to get onto the library systems, you need to be logged into the library. So I would recommend being logged into Blackboard actually alongside this as we go. Not enough credits available to view the book. My goodness, what is going on? We're being let down here. My goodness. Will they let me download it, or will I not have enough credits? That was working fine earlier. Wonder why that is. That's a bit of a sod. Right, okay. I'm going to have to look into that for you. That's not good, is it? Right, I have a rescue plan. That's interesting. So I'm just going to have a look at the files section on here. This should be in your files, and I'll direct you there. That's not good, is it? So I'll have to get on to HART. Might try a different method. Boom, boom, boom. Aha, brilliant. Okay. I'll see if I can just share this with you on the Teams window. I have a backup as a hard copy. So been there before sometimes when you can't log into stuff, and that's not a good look. So if I just share that. Okay, so you can see the interface, right, that we're using. Under reading, you've got this, a model for analysing musical history. Right, we're going to look at that now. Right. So you can have a copy of this. This is in Wall. I was just going to flash it up in Wall. I will ask the LRC how that is going on there, because I usually have that problem. Run out of credits. Interesting. So let me just open. Seems to having a bit of a wobbly. Oh, the wonders. Let's just get a hard copy of my hard drive, shall we? Are you just getting a kind of a Word logo there at the moment? Because that's all I'm getting. I'm just going to download this and run it off my desktop. Just take a copy of this and I'll run it from here. Dee, 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 dee. Where? Haha. Right, is that starting to come through now? It's just taking a little while. The formatting doesn't look good either. Oh yeah, it's starting to get there. There with. Oh, there we are. Okay then. Right, as that emerges. Right, it's done an interesting funky thing there with the formatting. I think what I'll do, could you see that even though it's a bit broken up? Should I put it back up? Because it's being a bit weird. But it may be because it's a Word document with the formatting. Try again. I'll get this converted to a PDF, but hopefully we'll resolve the reading online thing for after this session. Where is it? Yeah. Okay, that's a little bit broken up. I might just have to play with that a second. Probably won't let me edit it either. Right, okay, so I'm going to go with this. I'll make sure that there is a PDF version of this. I think it's just having a bit of a wobbly. This is from Wall's book, Studying Popular Music Culture, and it's a model. Now, models are what we call a heuristic device. What's a heuristic device? Anybody got any idea what a heuristic device is? I'll write it down. Heuristic device. Everybody goes off and does a quick Google. Instead, if you use Google Scholar. I'll be doing that in research. So Google Scholar is best for this kind of thing, right? A heuristic device. A heuristic device is a bit like a catalyst in chemistry. Right? Anybody got any chemistry qualifications here? Or at least did reasonably well at chemistry? Yeah? Yeah, for my O level, I had an E for chemistry, but there you go. I know what a catalyst is, though. A catalyst, as you know, then it helps to speed up a reaction, right now, and doesn't get used up itself in it. Yeah, in basic chemistry terms, you can see, well, I've got a grade E rather than a grade A. But the idea is that by introducing the catalyst, some form of chemical reaction, it speeds up the reaction, provokes the reaction, but doesn't become part of it. So a heuristic device, like a model of learning, is an intellectual equivalent of a catalyst. So we use it to get thinking about particular subject matter, right? You could, if you like, at this level, it does happen, master's level, you could put some store into critiquing the model, right? That's kind of a, pretty good postgraduate way of thinking. Is, again, often you use models and what have you with undergrad to say, look, look at this, look at this, look at this. And of course, like with more sciencey based subjects and STEM subjects, they're often very logical and based upon, interfaces and what have you, production interfaces and things like that. But in sort of cultural terms here, in history and what have you, they're not meant to be absolute, they're supposed to get you thinking, but actually finding, if you wanted to, it's the kind of postgrad thinking, faults in the model. What I would say is, being that kind of thinker myself when I was at university, you can easily end up down rabbit holes by kind of taking that approach, right? There are lots of potential rabbit holes in a subject like this, because there's just so much that you can go and study, and you can waste an awful lot of time on things. So you may want to critique the model. We certainly will, okay, and that's useful. But it's about the only model I use to sort of back up this first one. So, okay, the formatting's out a bit. I'll make sure that as an action point after this, that I'll put it in some like PDF or whatever and lock it so you can look at it. But it is in Wall's chapter. I'd be interested to know, considering that I've been told I don't have enough credits, whether you can get in and hit those learning materials. So if you can all give it a try after the session, I would like to have that feedback, because if that is the case, I'll need to rapidly get onto the library and say, oh, hang on a minute, something weird's going on here, because these guys need to look at this. So yeah, please go and try reading that online after, right? And let me know how you get on. But anyway, with regard to how the thing actually is, what you have at the top half of the model, I know the format's a bit out, are musical and cultural repertoires, and those arrows and stuff are all a bit out, so don't worry about that. We'll sort that out. But they're basically kind of placed all right. You've got Tin Pan Alley, European art, African American and European vernacular. Okay. These are not terms that Wall invented, right? And one of the useful things about Wall is that when he wrote the first edition of this book, he identified, looking back over nearly 100 years of studying popular music culture, that there were these four very strong, very dominant musical and cultural repertoires, and they'd already been named by previous authors. So you can go all the way back to the 1920s, and the term Tin Pan Alley came about. That was the early days of the songwriting industry in New York, and where people would write lyrics on their typewriters, and people would write songs on the piano, mainly for the Broadway market, for the musicals and what have you. And there's a corner of a couple of avenues and streets in New York where most of these people congregate. It was called Tin Pan Alley. So that term goes all the way back. Wall didn't invent it. It goes right the way back there. But what it means, it'd be good when you get into the book. Go and discover what it means. It's a whole lovely little sub-chapter on what Tin Pan Alley means. But essentially, to give you an essence of it, it's about the commercial music industry. It is about writing and producing music with high production values, right? It's constructed, the songwriter writes the song, the performer performs the song, the choreographer does the dance, or if you look at these days, the music video, yeah? That whole history of the music industry as in the recording industry and publishing industry subsectors, right? I'll look at the different subsectors with you, half a dozen of them. But that looks at commercial songwriting and production, right? Timpanelli. Then at the other side of it, you've got the European art, musical and cultural repertoire. No surprises really for guessing what that is. Once again, a great deal of what was written about popular music culture is based upon European art music, and the dominant ones, of course, being classical music, music for opera. You get a kind of impression that from that it's the top down, right, of European art. It's this idea of high art equals culture. We're going to deconstruct that on this module tremendously, but it's that idea of high art equals culture. That whole history of, you know, power in Europe and royal families with the money, dominant culture, sponsoring orchestras and the like. Even in the communist era, one of the things that the communists didn't chuck out was all this wonderful classical music, even though, you know, it could be described in their terms, in Marxist terms, as bourgeoisie. They realized the value of classical music and those various forms, right? But in many ways, it's a binary opposite to Timpanelli, because Timpanelli deals with popular music in terms of songwriting hits, yeah, and that history in music in musical theatre. And on the other hand, high art sponsored by big money and what have you. But what they both have, is the top end of that model, is better money, right? You need big resources to fund an orchestra. You know, big resources to launch an artist, you know, with a record deal, yeah? At the bottom half of that broken model are two others. To the left-hand side, under the Timpanelli, is the African American musical and cultural repertoire, which I'm sure we're quite familiar with. Historically speaking, studies, you know, looked into the early days of jazz and the development of jazz from its roots in the blues and minstrelsy and the kind of post-slave situation in North America. And once again, has been identified by many scholars as such. The evolution of jazz and stuff occupies a lot of the 20th century kind of work and what have you, and then into the area of kind of blues rock and hard rock and stuff being influenced by that kind of stuff by kind of white guys, and right the way through then to the birth of hip hop and the mainstreaming of hip hop and those kind of stories there. I'll come back to that one because it's one of the interesting ones to pick apart if we're going to critique the model. But for now, let's get an idea of what's what. So, and it's interesting, it sits under the Timpanelli in the model when the model's working, because the relationship between the African-American musical and cultural repertoires in the early part of the 20th century is so closely linked to Timpanelli. Right? In many ways, songs were either appropriated by Timpanelli writers from the blues and early emergent jazz traditions and what have you into the popular songs. But then if you wind the clock forward to more close to contemporary times and say the mainstreaming of hip hop around 1992, the dominance of the African-American musical and cultural repertoires in Timpanelli, in polished pop music, and, you know, that $1.5 million video in Janet Jackson and what have you, right? So there's a interesting relationship there, and both of them kind of are originating in North America. Back over to the other side of the model underneath the European art, subordinate to it is the European vernacular, musical and cultural repertoires, plural. And in many ways, it's easy to pick some of those out. They're more often than not identified as various different regional folk musics, right? On the whole, historically, a long history of that pre-20th century as well. Then settlers from Europe going to America, taking those kind of forms of music there. You know, it comes as a surprise for some people that country and Western music, I would very strongly argue, is part of the European vernacular. musical and cultural repertoire. It was those kind of folk musics that were brought over by various different people, working class, poor, underclass, immigrants, right, from Europe, trying to find a new life in America, bringing their music with them, what have you. Yeah? But more recent parallels in European vernacular would be the huge impact of punk. I've mentioned punk before now. Wall, actually, quite interesting. When you start to read into Wall, he makes some useful comments about. It's just a bit of fun here, you know. He suggests 3 of the biggest musical cultures that impacted in the 20th century. One of them he does argue for is punk. Many people do, and that is very European vernacular. It's about working class people talking about their, you know, working class lives, and in many ways representative of the subordination they are to the you know, higher end of society above them. So these 4 key musical and cultural repertoires had been identified by many different authors and are sedimented down into those 4 kind of terms. And so Wall represents them here in his model. Say, look, that's kind of the main dominant musical and cultural repertoires of the 20th century, right? So when you look at the bottom half of the model, once again, it's a little bit broken, but we will fix it after, and you'll get used to this. The social, economic, and technical factors. Okay, and what the kind of model does when it's not broken is it says that there's a churn that's going on, right? And it's a relationship between these musical and cultural repertoires in the top half of the model, and in the bottom half of the model, you've got social change, right? That drives everything. Or you can even argue that musical and cultural repertoires drive social change. Yeah, it's a reflexive thing. Yeah, you can say that changes in society influence musical and cultural repertoires. You can say that musical and cultural repertoires influence changes in society. Both are and they're examples. See, that's how you start to get off into this idea of developing arguments and stuff, by looking at the relationship between musical and cultural repertoires and these powerful forces, social change being one of them, right? The other 2 that they've got in there, economics of the music industries. That's why we study that as one of the pillars here, the relationship between musical and cultural repertoires and the music industries, historically speaking, right? You know, and then the other one, the technologies of production and reproduction. They're the other big element that we study here, one of the 4. You'll note, won't you, yeah, that from the model, the top part deals kind of a lot with musical and cultural repertoires. There's your musicology and your links into culture and to genre and what have you. And then you've got society, history, social change, culture there, social change, economics of the music industries, and the technologies of production or reproduction. And that kind of interaction, right, is where he suggests that, you know, most of the activity has been in studying popular music culture up until the 20th century. And he doesn't correct himself in the 2013 version. He just actually adds a couple of more contemporaneous developments in those musical cultural repertoires and tries to pin them onto the model. Okay, so that, I'll stop sharing that. I'm a bit disturbed that I can't give you that reading online. Go back and check it. It might just be a glitch. Otherwise, I'm just going to look to see if I've got an alternative in the files. I might have a PDF of the first couple of chapters to look at, and you'll find them in there. Let me just, I'll get used to working in Teams eventually. I'll just browse the...
Lloyd, just you probably don't know, but the songwriters have got a session after you.
Yeah, this is my last move. So, yeah, I'll try and finish at 5:2 in the future, guys. Sorry about that. You'll also find that I get so into the subject that it's difficult to shut me up sometimes. Okay, I'm just looking through there. There we are, musical and cultural repertoires. I do have it as a PDF. Musical and cultural repertoires. I thought I'd done this before in case it went wonky. Da-da-da. Give me a chance to catch it. It does take a bit of catching up, doesn't it? There we go. There's a chapter there then. Wonderful. So, come on, blooming interface. Oh, great. It got there. Oh, at last. This is my backup. Always have a backup. That's what they say, don't they, in presentations? Always have a backup. There it is. Musical and cultural repertoires as a PDF. Okay. That's the 2013 2003 version. But that's fine. Yeah, that stands. Go off and read that. All right. For next week, I'll go onto the library and try and fix the other version. But do go and try and click on it. Do let me know if it's just doing a weird one today for me or not. Okay. And I'll also make sure there's quick links under Blackboard as a backup. I better go because it'll be. I don't want to spoil things with the songwriter. So if you want to toddle off, that's fine. Great. If it's downloading for you, man, that's great. Let's just. So if anybody has any problems getting hold of it, just let me know, and we'll fix that. And if you want to stay in the room, because you don't have to be anywhere else, I don't mind staying in for another 5 or 10 minutes. But if you've got to go, you've got to go. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. You know, it will be a lot more in depth each week now. I obviously have to set up the terms of the course and what have you. Any questions? Fire them my way. I've got an open door policy. Okay, and I'll stay in the room for another 5-10 minutes if anybody wants to stay and field any questions.